coming up on episode 28 of Create If Writing.
And these personal recommendations are so much more powerful than like banner ads or any sort of paid advertising.
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up.
At the end of the day, it's really about the human-to-human connection.
One by one, the stars are disappearing from.
Welcome to Create If Writing, the podcast for writers and bloggers, giving you inspiration and authentic platform building tools. I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant, and you can find more at createifwriting.com. Hey guys, welcome to the show. This is episode 28, and I'm so excited to have this guest on my show because her podcast is one of the first that I listened to when I first started listening to podcasts last year. And yes, I just started listening to podcasts last year. I'm way behind on the times, and I made up for it by starting a podcast. That's how things go here. So I'm interviewing Gabriela Pereira, who is the instigator, as she calls it, of DIYMFA.com. Now, for those of you guys who aren't in the writing world, an MFA is a Master of Fine Arts, and it's considered the terminal degree in creative writing, although you can get a doctorate. But, I mean, who wants to be a doctor of creative writing? Sorry if I just offended some of my audience there. You're amazing, doctors of creative writing. But the MFA is considered terminal, which means basically it's kind of the highest level that you can get to. You're able to teach at the university level, and not very many people get them. They're hard to get into. They can be very expensive, and it doesn't guarantee publication. It's also not for everybody. MFAs are often considered sort of more in the literary genre of things. So if you write literary fiction, it can be great. If you are writing something like science fiction or romance, it may not be something that's a great fit for you. In any case, Gabriela started DIY MFA after getting her own MFA from the New School in New York. And she talks about how she started the whole community that she has over at DIY MFA and kind of the reasons behind starting the whole site and the podcast. So look forward to hearing why writers need community. So before we dive into the interview, which, I should mention, it will be the first of two with Gabriela because we got totally chatty and talked for an hour, and they kind of lended themselves to being two halves because the second is all about process. So we'll go into process at a later time, but for this week, it's half of our episode. So it kind of cuts off at an abrupt moment without goodbyes or any of that nice kind of closure there, but you'll get more from Gabriela. And I'm also going to be on her podcast later this month. So anyway, we had a lot to talk about, clearly. So this week for me, I'm recording this hoping that you are not going to hear a crying baby, hoping that I don't hear a crying baby. We've had in our house all kinds of crazy medical things going on. And that's just, when we get to talking about process and the next interview with Gabriela, it's writing process, man, with kids, it's just difficult. Podcasting with kids, it's difficult. But I'm glad to be here. And I want to invite you, if you are not already in the Create If Writing Facebook group, that's where our community happens. And I really hope that you jump over there, and you can find that in the show notes, along with links to everything that Gabriela and I talk about and links to the DIY MFA site. So you can find the show notes at createifwriting.com/028. because this is episode 28. I also have started a Patreon page, which I always think of as Patreon. And a quick aside, I've actually been in talks with Joanna Penn from the Creative Penn to come on the show, and I just need to find a date that works, more likely a time since she's in Bath, England. So maybe that'll be in the middle of the night for me. I like those kinds of, I've done some of those recordings and they're fun. I really like them. So in any case, but you can find me on Patreon to support the show for as little as $1 an episode. And there's some pretty cool perks. So head over to patreon.com/kikimojo. I'm always going to pronounce it with a bad British accent. That's just, maybe that'll be memorable for you. But that just helps offset some of the costs of the show. I don't have sponsors for the show, at least not at the moment. But I can kind of be my own sponsor because I want to tell you about something kind of exciting going on next week. So as I record this, it is January. Gosh, I don't even know what date it is. Let's check the calendar. This is typical for me. I never know what day it is. The 13th. Nope. because today's not Wednesday. I'm recording this on January 12th. I know this because I'm looking at a calendar, but it's almost midnight, so we'll see if I get the episode up in time. And Sunday I'm having to look now. That's a Monday. Sunday the 17th, I'm teaming up with Angela England to do another live webinar on creative profitability, which is making money with your writing. It's making money with your blog without using sponsored posts. We did this in the fall around Black Friday, and it was really popular despite a website crash. So we are doing 2 trainings, actually. The first will be Sunday, the 17th, and the second will be on Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Central Time, the 19th. And we're also going to be guest hosting the Twitter chat for Blog Elevated. And you can find that'll be Monday night, the 18th at 9 p.m. Central Time, #Blog Elevated. So we're really excited. And we're going to be selling the Creative Profitability course, which we are just finishing up now. It's going to be all about e-courses and email list building to kind of create the backbone of your business, e-books. And I talk you through a whole module on webinars and how to set those up, how to deal with tech failures, the things that you need to know, and a breakdown of all the different providers. So if you're thinking about doing webinars, if you're thinking about e-courses, if you want to know how to write profitable ebooks, this is going to be the course for you. And we're going to be offering insane bundles where we had to email ourselves and ask, are we crazy for doing this? And we are, so we're going to do it anyway. So you can sign up for those at creativeprofitability.com. And I'll leave a link also in the show notes so you can find it. So if that's a little easier to remember, my site, creativewriting.com/028, I'll leave the link in there. But you'll have the option to pick a Sunday training at 2 p.m., Tuesday night at 8 p.m. They'll be the same training, so don't sign up for both. And then you can join us Monday night at the Twitter chat. So the best bonuses are going to be for the people who come live, and there will be great bonuses. So, okay. With that being said, I think it's time to dive into this interview with Gabriela Pereira, and make sure you visit the site diymfa.com for tons of resources, articles, everything you need to know about writing, and also some amazing, amazing interviews over at the DIY MFA podcast. So don't miss that. And let's talk now about why writers need community. On today's episode, I'm talking with Gabriela Pereira from DIY MFA. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. So I am very excited to talk to you today because you are actually one of the first podcasts that I listened to when I started listening to podcasts. I don't think I told you that.
That is so cool.
Yeah, I was searching for podcasts related to writing, and yours popped up, and I just really loved it. I love the concept and everything else, and so I'm really excited to get to talk to you a little bit about DIY MFA and also about where you come from. So I wanted to start off and just ask, how did you get to where you are? I mean, you have this really great website and community and podcast built around DIY MFA. So tell me a little bit about your writing journey.
So, well, it's been kind of a roundabout process. In a past life, I was a toy designer once upon a time. I was a psychology, child development researcher once upon a time. I mean, I kind of done like a whole bunch of really crazy, weird things, but really the driving force behind everything that I've ever done or studied is like, I'm very much a sort of self-starter, lifelong learner kind of person. Like in college, I was sort of notorious for being that student who would march into a professor's office hours and be like, I don't feel like writing this paper, but I'm going to write this other idea that I have because I think it's just more interesting. And I hope you're okay with that. And those professors thought that was kind of hilarious and they like played along, and some of them did not take quite as kindly to it, but as was often reflected in my end of semester grades. But the end of the day was that I kind of always had my own ideas of what I wanted to work on and what I thought would help me learn more. Like that's sort of been the driving force. I always want to learn more. If I wake up in the morning and by the end of the day I haven't learned something new, then it hasn't been a productive day for me. So, DIY MFA came from my experience in an actual traditional MFA program. And I did a wonderful program here in New York City called the New School. I did their Writing for Children program. And it was really a phenomenal experience. And what happened was at the end of it, I didn't want it to end. And, they do that annoying thing with you in grad school where they make you graduate. And so, I got to the end and, unfortunately, I couldn't exactly just stay and be a student forever because my husband probably would have killed me if I didn't go out and like get a job. So I was like, how do I continue this? How do I keep this learning experience going? And at first I thought, DIY MFA was this crazy idea that I just posted about on my personal blog. And my personal blog at the time had, which it's still out there on the interwebs. Like if you, Google my name, you'll probably find it buried in, the Google archive somewhere. But it was the small personal blog that had maybe 12 followers. And one of them was my mother, and who still, by the way, reads all of my stuff. And, I posted this question, like, if there was a DIY version of an MFA, would you do it? And I didn't expect anyone to even notice my website in the first place, but all of a sudden people started coming out of the woodwork and commenting and being like, OMG, I totally want a DIY MFA, or I've always wanted to get my MFA, but I don't have time, or I don't have the money, or I don't live anywhere near an MFA program, so I'd have to move. And all of a sudden that's got me thinking, like, maybe there is a way to DIY this graduate school experience. I mean, it's not like some sort of fundamental step in a person's education, like, high school or college, where you kind of do need that experience, this more formal experience to a certain extent. But, by the time you're hitting an MFA level, you can do a lot of that stuff yourself. And if you want to be a successful long-term writer, you kind of need to know how to keep doing it on your own, because it's not like an MFA program is going to hold your hand forever, as I, discovered to my chagrin. So that's where it kind of started, was this crazy idea. And I posted about it. And then I saw from the fact that there were, more than 0 comments, I realized like, maybe there's something to this. And then I set a challenge to myself, because I knew that if I didn't have enough to say about it, it would be a bad idea to start a DIY MFA project of some sort. So I challenged myself to blog about it every single day. And I still remember it was the month of September in 2010. And I literally set a schedule where I was going to blog for 30 days. It was kind of my blog version of NaNoWriMo.
Yeah.
But in September and around the DIY MFA theme. And I figured if I could find 30 days worth of stuff to say on this topic, then maybe it would be a sustainable concept to continue for the long haul. So the long and the short of it is, clearly I had enough to say about it, because I wrote about it for 30 days and then I kept on writing about it. And now there's actually a book coming out in 2016. So yeah, I think I had enough to say about it. In fact, it's sort of hard for me to not find stuff to say about it at this point. But in the beginning, there was that fear. So I kind of wanted to challenge myself. So that's where it kind of started. And then at this point, DIY MFA, it's my full-time job, and I love it. And it's like my passion, and yay.
That is so neat. I love hearing stories like that. And I feel like there are so many stories where it's kind of meandering, like you set out in one direction and the underlying sort of theme stays true, but where you go is sometimes really different than where you thought you were going to go. And so I think, an MFA program isn't for everybody. And, a blog I really love, MandyWallace.com. Mandy's been talking a lot about MFA programs. Should you go? Should you not go? And I don't think they're for everyone. And it's interesting because writing is one of those spaces you don't need the degrry to do it.
Exactly.
Right?
It's not like medical school or something where, like, if I'm going to have a lobotomy, I sure as heck hope that neurosurgeon has an MD. But like, seriously, if I'm reading a book, I don't care what the writer's pedigree is. I just want to read a good book. So yeah, I totally hear you.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's neat to have, and the MFA programs aren't all equal. So I don't know how your program was, but mine was, I went to University of North Carolina at Greensboro and got my MFA there in fiction. And it was much more of a like sort of mentorship, apprenticeship program where, yes, we took classes the first year. The second year, you really didn't. You were literally writing your thesis and doing other things as well. I think I took a class for fun because I'm a nerd. And then I was teaching composition to the freshmen at the college. And that was an experience as well. So, it was just really different. It was not as technical. And some programs are a lot more technical, a lot more based on, academia and reading. And I mean, we did a lot of reading as well. So,
and I'm going to like make your head explode and your listeners' heads explode even more. Like even within the same MFA program, it can be a completely different experience within the same program. Because for instance, I went to the new school and I did the writing for children division, which is a very small group of people. Like usually they only take enough people to fill one workshop's worth. So like 10 students, 12 max. So it's a much smaller community, very different from say like the fiction group, which is like, 60, 70, however many people. And then also because the professors are different people and like it's very niche. Like for instance, in the MFA in writing for children, there was a lot more, we had a lot more exposure to the business side of writing than what I heard from my friends who were fiction or poetry or nonfiction writers. So even within the same program, you could have a completely different experience. And it can all be equally valid and equally good and wonderful, but it is different. And you want to know kind of what you're getting yourself into.
Absolutely. And, my program it was 7. There were 7 of us in my class for fiction and I think 7 poets as well. So, each program's totally different. And clearly within each program, some of them are bigger and the bigger programs, might have the different divisions. And it's just, when people are asking that question, should I do it? I think it depends on what your goals are. And then that will depend what program. And if you can get into it, that was the other thing is they're really hard to get into most of them. And so, but you don't need it to write. And so I found it invaluable. I would go back and get my MFA again. I mean, it sounds like you would too if you like school the way I do. But, just to spend that time with people who were writers, who were putting out work and have those eyes on your work in that really small workshop setting. Although I did have a piece get torn apart once and that once was enough,
Yeah, I think we've all had that experience. So I think it's sort of like the quintessential writing workshop experience. At some point you're going to get completely torn down and you just have to learn to bounce back. The one thing and this is something I stress a lot when I talk about MFA programs is I think that they, first of all, DIY MFA is not in the business of bashing the MFA system. That is not what we're about at all. If anything, it's more about having an alternative because like you said, the MFA is incredibly valuable, but it's valuable for one subset of all the writers out there. There are a lot of writers out there who, not even for logistical reasons, but like, craft related reasons. Like for instance, if you want to write purely genre fiction, like you are a diehard sci-fi or romance author, you're going to have a hard time finding an MFA program that's going to be willing to embrace genre or commercial writing. And it's not because MFA programs are bad. It's just that they're really focused on one particular niche and a whole lot of other niches just don't fit that mold. So I think it's, the purpose behind DIY MFA was to provide an alternative because you can still be serious about your work, even if you're not literary with, air quotes here. So that was kind of the impetus behind it as well. I mean, for a lot of people, it's a pragmatic thing like, oh, I can't afford it or, oh, I can't take the time to go because I have a day job or whatever. But for a lot of people, it's just like, there's no MFA out there for me. What do I do?
Well, tell me about the community because I feel like you have a really thriving community over there and a lot of people just really getting involved and reading and taking part when you guys have, I know you had an online conference this past fall and just all the different things. How did the community form? And tell me a little bit more about what it's like over there.
So the community, it's interesting because like, on one hand, we're not one of those websites that gets a bazillion comments every time a post goes up. You see a lot of other author bloggers out there who have a lot of engagement sort of on the website. For me, I'm very protective of my people. So the engagement really happens sort of within more of the like inside community. So, we have, when you join the email list, there's also a Facebook group and it's hidden. So you only know about it once you get on the email list. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to keep it sort of as a safe space for writers who really are committed to the DIY MFA mindset and the DIY MFA sort of approach. And the other thing too is like our courses, like that's even more like we have a flagship course. And so that community like is even more sort of sheltered because I want to really create a very safe space for those writers. And within those communities, I mean, we have writers who've come back and retaken the course. Like once you take the course the first time, you can basically take it as many times as you want for free. So I've had people come back literally every semester since they signed up because they're there for the community and not for, they've learned the material already. They could probably teach the class better than I could. But at this point, they're coming back to connect with other writers. And so for me, I kind of think of it sort of when I think about my word nerds, my writers, I'm very protective of them. Like I feel sort of big sisterly, kind of like when I was in high school and my kid sister was in 8th grade and like, you did not mess with my kid sister because, I would go to the mat for her. And I feel the same way for my writers. Like I want to help them and really make it so that they feel like this is a space where you can ask questions and you can mess up and no one's going to laugh at you or get mad at you or think you're silly, because guess what? I'm really silly and ridiculous and I ask stupid questions too sometimes, and that's okay. It's about sort of having a learning environment where it's okay to try things out.
I think that's really neat. And, something you said, talking about how you feel about the community. I spoke with Katie Kremistos, who runs Biz Women Rock earlier this year, and she has a thriving Facebook community. And she talked about how, you really set the tone for that. Like when you're the person who's the head of those kinds of communities, you're the one setting the tone. And that doesn't mean that the community doesn't sort of organically form. But like if you want to have a community that's a safe space, you're the one who sets that tone. And so I think it's so important, like you said, to have a sense of what it is you're going to do for your people and how you're going to care for them so that it doesn't become, I'm in your Facebook group and I'm kind of a lurker. And then I'm in some others where, I've left some, I guess, they get really spammy, or you can just tell the person in charge doesn't care. It's just a group. It doesn't matter. It's just kind of there. And that's definitely not the case with your group, that there's definitely a sense of you setting the tone of this being a community that wants to thrive, to help each other and to, really lift each other up rather than, be competitive or to have any negativity. So I love that you're doing that. It just makes it a much better place.
Thank you. I really appreciate you saying that because, that's something that I work really hard at. And I mean, another thing too, like that sense of like protectiveness, it also extends like people who mess with my writers, people who mess with my word nerds, like they will get the smackdown really quickly. And that, thankfully, thank goodness, we have not had basically like we had our first troll ever on the website, like a few months ago. And like seeing his website has been around for I don't know how many years. I was kind of actually like amused that like, wow, this is my first troll ever. This is kind of hilarious, but also a little odd. But the thing was like none of that, like if you look for it, you wouldn't be able to find it in the comments because we shut it down before it like started. And that's something that, I totally get it. Like you don't want, the whole censorship thing, and some writers really just don't want to censor their community and they want to let people just let it all hang out. That's not the tone of our community. And I feel like, okay, you know what? It's my turf. So I get to choose. And if I think you're kind of messing with my people, you're going to get the boot right now. And it's like, it's not even going to make it to the website because we're just not going to let it show up there because that can poison a community so quickly. So yeah, that's another thing that I feel sort of strongly about. And I think it's the website owner or the community leader's prerogative. Like some people choose to have it be an open thing, and that's great. All the more power to them that they can let that slide and they can kind of sit with the conflict that inevitably rises up. I'm not one of those people. I would spend all my time obsessing about every negative comment and I would freak out and I would have a meltdown and that would not be good. So I just know myself and I know my people and my team well enough that we're like, okay, we're just not going to let this even go near the community.
Yeah. Well, why do you think writing, takes place in a community? What's so important about community for writers?
That's a good question, because if you think about it, writers are kind of solitary and we're mostly introverts. Or a lot of us are introverts. Yep. And so we kind of have a hard time with people skills in general. So it's kind of an interesting thing that community is such a fundamental aspect of it. I think it's because writing is so lonely. That you kind of want to find those partners in crime. You want to find those people who get you. And I had the experience myself of like finding fellow writers for the first time. And now I get to see other writers having that first time connection. You know, like last year at the Writer's Digest conference, a bunch of DIY MFA people came to the conference because I was going to be there. And so we all sort of got together, and seeing other writers connect with fellow writers for the first time was so cool. Cause I was like, oh my gosh, you're having your first community moment. That's so cool. And I think a lot of that too is that, it's tough out there to be a writer. Like basically you pour your heart and soul onto the page, and then you send it out to agents and editors and magazines and this and that and the other, and you get the door slammed in your face more often than not. So you kind of need that support system, or you're going to give up before you even make it in the door. And I probably wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have the support network and the people who are willing to hear me gripe about every time I've gotten rejected, and, the people who are like, no, get back on out there, you can do it, and all that stuff. Like if you don't have that support system, you're never going to make it to that first great moment. Once you have that first yes, it's a lot easier to kind of keep it going. But until you get that first, foot in the door, it can be really tough.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think when I was in the actual MFA and there were 7 of us and we did the workshop, even like the one where I got torn apart, like I knew that they had my best interest at heart. They wanted me to either trash the story, which is what I ended up doing, or make it something that worked. It wasn't something where it was like, we don't like you. We don't want you to succeed so we can succeed. It was one of those moments where it was like, we all want to make each other better. Like that's the reason that we critiqued at all. And that was so important, and on the blogging side, I've blogged for, I guess since 2007. So just a long time. And for years I did it alone. I didn't know there were groups of bloggers out there. And when I started connecting with them, I grew more as a blogger because I knew I learned things from other people and I had encouragement and I saw what was possible in other people doing things. So it's really similar. I think writing and blogging, you're doing both alone, but finding other people who are doing similar things, it helps you to learn and grow and also to kind of keep going. And, blogging, I don't think has the same rejection like that writing does. There's a lot of years of hearing no's or hearing nothing or waiting, but in a similar way, I think you need that community to kind of keep you going.
There's also the factor of like information. I mean, it's hard for me sometimes like now because I've been sort of in this writing universe pretty much since like 2007. I've been pretty actively involved, but I still remember my very first writing conference. I had no idea what a query letter was. And it's, like there's all this lingo and there are all these processes of like, how do you submit a book? Like, a lot of people don't know that these days you can't just send your book to a publisher. You kind of need an agent unless it's a very small publisher. But a lot of writers don't know that. And I certainly didn't know that. I wasn't born knowing that, but it took me a long time to learn it. And sort of having that community, it's like having a collective information and people can, you can share with each other and help each other understand this really crazy world that is publishing, because it is kind of insane. Like there's a lot of like counterintuitive stuff with the publishing world and it's sort of just the way it is.
Yep.
But you need to get it and you need to understand it. I think every career has that. Every field has that to a certain degree.
Yeah. There are the sort of sets of rules that you have to follow and you have to know them. And that's the thing you don't always, so other people help. And I think today as well, platform building is totally different and fairly new. When I got out of school and was talking with agents and publishers, it was not even a blip, on the radar in 2009. Like there was no question, do you have an online presence? But now, especially if you're writing nonfiction, but I would imagine fiction is similar, but there is like a sense where, do you have anything? Like, do you have followers? Do you have an email list? Are you on Twitter? All these questions that matter. And so those things, especially like I talked to a lot of writers who are just like, I just want to write. And I'm like, that's awesome. You also need to like go ahead and start some of these other things, like just for your own good, even if it's not going to keep you from being published, you're going to want them once you're getting published. You're going to want already an audience of people who know you. And it's easy to build these days, but you kind of need to know how. So again, that's a really good, reason to stay connected is to get sort of that that knowledge and get to kind of go to the big bank of the communal understanding of those things so that you can, there's always something new to learn. And that's where I think the learning happens. And it's a little bit easier if you're just, you don't have to go read a post on Twitter. You can ask in a Facebook group and somebody can, give you the name of an app and you're like, oh, my life has changed, now I know how to do this quicker. So yeah, I love the community, both for writers and for bloggers. I think it does provide that information and just kind of, the motivation to keep going. So I love that. And I think that your community definitely, does both of those things. And I see that there. So congratulations. I'm building a great community.
Oh, thank you. Also, I wanted to add something too, because I think, it's good to know the rules, but you can also break the rules, but you can't break them if you don't know what they are in the first place. And that's true with like the actual nuts and bolts of writing, but it's true with the community stuff too. And a huge thing, like this sort of goes with the community aspect as well, is that these days, especially because there's all this like talk about platform and like digital and online and all these buzzwords. But at the end of the day, the really like the most valuable way to sort of jumpstart your career, and this is true in writing, and I would assume it's true in just about any other field as well, is it's like person-to-person connections. And I mean, if you think about it, like it was person-to-person connections that led me to signing with my agent. It was person-to-person connections that led me to meeting my publisher and then meeting my editor. And it has always been like human to human, even if it's, through multiple degrees of separation. But at the end of the day, it's like, as you build that community, you're also building potential people who can then connect you with other people that you eventually need to connect with. One of the wonderful things about an MFA program is that as people graduate and as you graduate, you have like a whole cohort of potentially soon to be published writers. And as people get published, then they can introduce you to their editor or their agent or their publicist or their this or their that, and you can introduce them. And that network is so, I think, important and so useful, because it's hard to do that by yourself. So I think sometimes I find that in like, given the digital space, it's very easy to get caught up with like Twitter followers or number of blog hits or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's really about the human to human connection. And that starts at home. That starts with your writing group. That starts with like your individual connections to other humans who are writers.
Yeah, I like to remind my people that not to think of it as page views, but people. Each of those page views, it is a person. It's a person looking at your site, whether you're looking at that or email list, or I like to talk about platform building, and I get really nerdy about that. And people kind of get overwhelmed. And like you said, the buzzwords and like, I don't want to do this. And I'm like, no. All right, take the words out. If the words, stress you out, take the words out. You're building your audience of readers. You're building a community of people who want to hear what you have to say. And then it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I can do that. We all want readers, right? And if you don't, then write a diary, and that's great. But if you want readers, just do whatever it takes mentally to change kind of the way you see some of these things that are, a stumbling block to you, whether it's Twitter followers or email list or whatever, any of those things. Take them out and realize that it's a connection and it's a person and it's a potential reader for your work. And like you said, they could possibly introduce you to somebody else who would love your work. And so
exactly,
I love to think of platform because that's how I'm thinking of it. It's a community of people who want to read what I have to say or what you have to say. And that I just really think, especially for writers who are, balking at this idea, and I meet so many of them who are like that, you just have to reframe it and just think of it a different way and think how cool is it that you can connect with an audience before you have a book out? Like, this is a really new thing, very relatively new, that you could actually find these readers without having your book yet. And then by the time you have a book, you already have all these like champions in your corner, which is really cool. So anyway, my nerd is showing. Yeah.
And my big thing is like, I love what you're saying. And for me, it's really like these people, these super fans, I call them like my super fans, so that like they are gold, because these are the people who are ultimately like, they're not just possible readers for your book. They're also people who might tell other people about your book, or recommend your website to a friend. And these personal recommendations are so much more powerful than like banner ads or any sort of paid advertising or whatever. And this is one of the reasons, for instance, that at DIY MFA, in the beginning, I used to, whenever I brought anyone onto the team, I would publicly announce it, and I would, reach out to my alumni networks from the MFA or whatever. These days, we have a strict policy. No one comes onto the team who has not been on our email list and who has not been part of the community already, because it's been so much more sort of the engagement and the commitment that people bring when they're already part of the tribe. Now they just get to sort of be, lieutenants in it or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
that's a great way to think about it.
It's much more meaningful, and it's a better connection, and it builds up, it brings the community up as a whole a lot more. So I think it's really important to think about like sort of the community starts at home, and or like at home as in like your home base, your website or your email list or whatever your sort of fundamental network is with other writers or other people. And then it kind of extends from there. Like people often forget to reach out to the people they actually know already.
Yep.
At the beginning, and they're like, oh, I need to get fans. Like, no, get friends first and then worry about the fans later. That comes later.
Yeah, that's great. I know that there, if you know Brian Harris from Video Fruit, who does a lot of list building stuff, and one of the first exercises in his free kind of course, he has a paid one too, but it's to ask. And it's like the simplest thing ever. But to email the people you already know and be like, hey, I have an email list. Do you want to join it? And, I know a girl who's a writer, and she's working on, getting stuff submitted. She has a couple agents looking at things. And so she went through this free course, and it was really fun to see her on Twitter because she went bananas and got, I think, the most subscribers to her email he'd ever seen in like a day. It was something like 400 or 500 in like 24 hours. And she was like, I just asked the people I knew, and I didn't even make them like click the link. I just said, hit reply and I'll add you myself. And, she just had so much energy that, all of her fans and friends, and they passed it along. And I was like, what a simple way to grow an email list. You ask the people you know, and hey, if you know somebody else who would like my work, you pass that along. It's like you're saying, like those connections, and start at home, and then it just continues to build. And you never know, like I have some of my family, that not my parents, because like you were saying with your mom, yeah, my parents read everything, but my extended family, like I had one of my sisters-in-law email me and be like, hey, one of my good friends just passed along your Advent book to me and was like, hey, have you read this? It's awesome. And I was like, she was like, that's my sister-in-law. So she had her friends, telling her about me. And so it was funny that, there had been, and she was like, I think I was the one who actually told her, and she must have forgotten. But, there's these connections that happen, and you just never know like where the super fans are going to come from. So start with the people you know, and then, continue to build.
And October's almost over, and the dark nights are closing in again.
Well, it was kind of interesting as I was editing and getting this show ready tonight. I ended up having this really long chat with a friend named Sally that I actually met at a writers conference last year. And it just illustrated sort of why I feel like writers need community. We need to build a community with our audience, but we need to build a community also with other writers. And it's so important so that when you have those days, she was having a rough day, and it was just what I needed, I think, to lift me out of a day where I was exhausted, and her out of a day where a lot of negative things happen. It just reminded me, even though none of the things we said were about writing, that we are writers, that we connected over writing. And in this moment where we were both kind of needing a lift, we provided that to each other. So thank you, Sally. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether you're shy or outgoing, because P.S., those are not the same things. Either way, writers need community. It's hard to write corporately, like I can write in a public space if I can ignore people, like if I'm with strangers in a coffee house. But if I'm with a friend, I just talk. So a lot of our work is private, but we need that community. We need other people. We need the support. We need to learn things. We need to get spurred on by seeing what other people are doing. So speaking of that, I'm going to end with a plug for my friend Jackie Hook's book called Bear. And you can find it at JackieHooks.com/BARE. The book is so vulnerable. It begins with the story of how she and her sister were abducted when she was 6 years old. It's just a compelling story. It's a story of how God really stepped into a life where he was very unexpected and did some amazing things in her life. So she has become a good friend that I also connected with in person, but also through a writers conference. So writers, community, it's a thing. Let's get on that. And if you want to join my community, you need to find me on Facebook, Create If Writing. You can search for it or just head over to the show notes, createifwriting.com/018. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you have an inspired week.